Hi everyone, Niklas Heidloff here. As some of you might have heard, IBM acquired a company called Worklight at the beginning of this year. The company Worklight has a product also called Worklight, which is a mobile platform to build, deploy and manage HTML-based mobile apps, hybrid apps and native applications. In this video, I'm not going to give a general introduction to Worklight. There's really good documentation on worklight.com, and there's also a YouTube channel with lots of good videos about Worklight. What I want to do in this video is to demonstrate what I had to do in order to use XPages in combination with Worklight. The challenge with the currently publicly available Worklight version is that it doesn't allow developers to point to remote web applications. Instead, you have to copy your HTML file and all JavaScript, CSS and other web resources into the hybrid application. So I spent some time to build a prototype that shows how you can change Worklight to point against a remote web application, in my case an XPage, and still be able to use Worklight APIs, JavaScript APIs, and also to leverage the PhoneGap capabilities that come as part of Worklight. So here's what I had to do in order to make that run. And again, this is not a supported configuration. The Worklight team is looking into that, into extending and improving that. But as of now, it's not supported. I just want to show you or give you some information for how to get it running, at least in some simple cases, so that you can start to learn Worklight and the Worklight benefits. So here's what I had to do. First of all, I downloaded here the evaluation version of Worklight, and in order to install the Worklight server, first of all I had to install a MySQL database and then the actual Worklight server that runs on Tomcat. So here's how it looks like. This is my MySQL database, and here is my Worklight server. Now, once you have done that, you can open the console, the admin UI, on your port 8080. So in my configuration here, I have the Worklight server running on port 8080 and my Domino server on port 80. So going back to the install instructions, so that's how to set up the Worklight server. And then I also had to set up the IDE, which is based on Eclipse. So first of all, I installed an Eclipse IDE. Then I installed the Worklight SDK into that Eclipse IDE. And since I'm using Android here for my development, I also installed the Android SDK into that same Eclipse IDE. So then what I want to show you now is again how to use an XPage that runs obviously remotely, and in that XPage I want to be able to do two things. So this is the end result of that application. I want to do two things. One is I want to invoke Worklight APIs, like there's for example a JavaScript API that returns whether or not I'm connected to the Worklight server. And I also want to be able to call PhoneGap APIs. In this case, I don't use any of the predefined PhoneGap JavaScript APIs, but instead I use a so-called technique PhoneGap plugins to call via JavaScript down to my native Java Android code and return something. So this is essentially the sample that I want to show you how to get running. And I used another example here as a starting point. So when you go back to the website worklight.com, you can go under Get Started. You can go to Get Started, and in here are a lot of training modules, including the source code. So what the one that I took here is module 9.3. and it is a simple sample showing you how to implement a PhoneGap plugin. And here's the source code, and when you click on here you get a little presentation that, for example, describes what a PhoneGap plugin is. So here's now the Eclipse IDE. I already imported the sample from the worklight.com website, and essentially one project can have one or multiple apps. In this case there's one app in it, and the way these apps are structured is essentially always two parts. One part that includes all common code that runs on different platforms, and then you can define so-called environments that override and add platform-specific code. So in this case I have only one environment called Android, and I have common code. So when I open this, this is the an essential file here, the entry point, the one and only HTML file. So this is what you see here. It imports a couple of resources, and then it essentially says Worklight client init, and here is where you can put your HTML code. In this simple sample, it essentially only has a button, and when you click it, a JavaScript function greet_me is invoked. So in order to take a look what this function does, I open here the JavaScript file, and in this case it only says alert, please use an Android device. Now for all the code that is common, or in other words all the web-based code, I can run it directly here using the Worklight console. So this is my application, and I can now say, okay, run it as common resource, and then I can run it here in Firefox, use also Firebug, etc. to debug it, etc. And when I click it, I get the alert that you just saw. So this is a simple case for a very simple web-based application, but what I want to do now is, where is it, is to actually extend that functionality and do something special for Android. So the second or this other environment has already been created, and in here I have the same JavaScript file, or the file with the same name, but in this case I have a different implementation of the greet_me method, and this implementation essentially calls this PhoneGap plugin that allows me to trigger, to invoke my own Android native code, my own Java code via JavaScript. So essentially I call here a method to say hello, I pass in callbacks for successful and failure, and I pass in some parameter, in this case just a string. And what this JavaScript API actually invokes is what you then find here in the second project in your Eclipse IDE, which is the Android specific version of it. And in here I have now my Java code that invokes or executes some Java code, and in this case it just checks whether the action is say hello, which it is, and then it just responds what I pass in here as an argument. That's all. So very simple implementation, but you can imagine that in this source code here you can use all other Android APIs that you want, for example access to the camera, access to local contacts, etc. So far I haven't changed the sample from the website at all, but now I want to actually use an XPage. So in order to make that work I had to do a couple of things. So let's close these first. The first thing I changed was here in the Java class Android PhoneGap plugin. I changed the URL that is loaded and pointed it to my Domino server running locally here, and then my NSF and my XPage. There is, however, a second place where I had to change that, and that's another Java class. It's called Worklight or WL config.java, and in here I defined again a link to my Domino server. Now the reason why that is necessary is because the Worklight client tries to access the Worklight server from the web application, from the HTML, and the same HTML code also tries to access other resources from the Domino server. And that means that both the Worklight server on port 8080 and the Domino server on port 80 have to be accessed, and that is by default not possible because of one domain policy restrictions. So what I had to do here is to use a proxy, where I always go through the Domino server first, even if the Worklight client tries to access the Worklight server. And as you can see here, this is my Domino server, and this is here now a path pointing to my proxy, and then I basically forward to localhost, which is my Worklight server on port 8080. So in order to make this work, I had to, where is it? Right here, there's a directory under the data directory and then properties, and there's a file called proxyconfig.properties, just this one here, and here is where I defined my proxy that points to the local host, to the Worklight server on port 8080. Now I did it in this file directly so that it also works for anonymous users. My understanding is, I might be wrong though, is that if you use policy documents and Domino administrator to define these, it only works for authenticated users. So that's why I had to do it manually here in this file. So after I've done that, I could try this. So this is the console running on port 8080, and now just in order to test the proxy, I tried to open here the same console, and as you can see, it works when I use here the proxy URL. So that was the first set of changes that I had to do. Then also, let me go back into the IDE right here. So then, when you point to the XPage, the XPage also needs to be able to import or access these other resources like JavaScript files and CSS files. And in order to make that work, what I had to do here was to go again in the Android project, and then there's a folder assets www default, and all the files under this default directory are files that I had to import into my NSF. So here, for example, are JavaScript files, there's CSS files, etc. And these 5 directories I had to 6 directories I had to import into my NSF. So so here is my Domino designer now, and this is my sample database WL NSF, and in here I imported these folders from my Android project to make them available for my XPage. And then what I could do is I could essentially take the HTML file again from my Android project and copy that HTML file into an XPage. Now I didn't copy it one-to-one, but I used some XPages coding conventions here. For example, here my resources. But this is now my XPage. It's basically a copy of the HTML file in my Android project, and in here a couple of different CSS files are invoked, some configuration is done, and some JavaScript files are imported. And here's my actual HTML code. In this case, my 2 buttons, one with the label is connected, the other one called phone gap. And these are the functions I'm going to talk about in a second a little bit more. But before I do that, there's one more thing that I had to change to make this work, and that is I had to do a change here in wlclient.js. There's a function in there called handle direct update. Worklight has the ability to check for updates to the web resources of a hybrid application, and if they are available, Worklight can invoke the update directly. Now in my case I didn't want to do that because again I don't want to copy the file, the web resources locally, but I always and only want to use the remote version. So what I had to do in order to disable this direct update was to comment this whole function out and then I just created another function with the same name that really doesn't do anything other than to finish this init flow, and that's it. So then finally, with all these changes, I could actually call my at my XPage here running in a hybrid Worklight application, and let me show you that it actually works. So this is again the Eclipse IDE, and what I want to show you now is here the log. So I clean all of this, and then I launch the simulator, and I open the application again, and while it's loading here, you should see some debug statements showing up here in a second. And my application is up and running, and you can actually see that it tried, or that it accessed, the Worklight server. For example, here is one of the responses, and again it's using my proxy here. It called some URL app services API, etc., and it got returned a success. So that's just to prove that my XPage application can actually invoke now the Worklight APIs that use the Worklight server. So and this is also basically all that this button does. It calls the Worklight API is connected. So when I press on here, it tells me is connected. Let's take a look at that source code. So I go here in my XPage. This is the button is connected. It invokes JavaScript function is connected to Worklight, and this is only this function here. I do an alert is connected, and this is the Worklight API is connected. So that's the first example, and then the second one is basically the same version that I talked about earlier. I call here, I use a PhoneGap plugin to call into my Android specific Java code, and it just returns a label, in this case XPages developers, back to the JavaScript. So again, let's take a look at that code. That code is here in my JavaScript file, imported into my Domino database, and here is my greetme function, and I call here the PhoneGap plugin, and I call it with a parameter XPages developers, which is exactly what is returned from my Java code that I showed earlier, right here. Okay, so that's it. That's a very simple sample showing how to use Worklight to point against a remote XPage application, and it proves that you can invoke the Worklight JavaScript APIs from the XPage as well as the PhoneGap APIs. Thanks a lot for your attention.